Welcome back to today's video. Today is Sunday, October 6th, 2024, and today we are going to be talking about the Democratic Party now investing in two battleground states in the 2024 Senate elections and in some cases the presidential election as they head into the final stretch of this 2024 campaign season. The state of Texas has been at the forefront of many political conversations surrounding the U.S. Senate, and so has the state of Florida. Both of these states, two states the Democrats previously wrote off as unattainable for their political party in this election cycle after a series of polls show that Texas and Florida are more competitive than the state of Montana, where there is currently a Democratic incumbent seeking re-election. The Democratic Party has been very quick to focus all of their resources on just a few battleground Senate seats. What I'm deciding to do here is I'm going to fill out where we are when it comes down to our Senate map to help understand what the motivations were for the Democratic Party and the Republican Party as they spent their time allocating resources and funds in the respective battleground states across the nation. And what the Democratic Party knew was that they were coming into this election at an immediate deficit, right? They were at a point where Republicans had the upper hand in almost every single instance, and it would be about breaking that down in order to win the election. And for a while, it didn't look like that was super attainable, besides going through a very specific process through Montana, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Arizona, and Nevada. And beyond then, they would still be reliant on, at the time, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris winning the election, and now Kamala Harris and Tim Walz winning the race. And allow me to explain that too, right? You're taking a look at some states where Democrats are the favorites in, but not the most, significant favorites in, and where it would again require them to win in a number of Trump states to win the election. It would require them to win in states like Ohio, states like Montana, and these things just simply have become more and more out of reach as we've gotten closer to November. And when you take a look, again, I'm just filling out my Senate map here. This is just where things stand today, according to my own metrics. What we're finding is that Republicans, again, have this upper hand, and Democrats look to Montana as an opportunity to win, but now they're wondering, now they're questioning. Where do we go from here if Montana has suddenly come out of reach? And for a while, too, Montana did look like it was within reach for the Democratic Party. A lot of the earlier polls had indicated, the same ones that now show Jon Tester losing, said that Jon Tester actually would stand a significant chance against Tim Sheehy. Tim Sheehy was the Republican who was handpicked by Mitch McConnell and Donald Trump himself. He was the most electable Republican. There was a consideration. In fact, there was another candidate, Matt Rosendale, who's an incumbent U.S. representative who wanted to run in this race again in 2022, was hoping to get the endorsement from Donald Trump. And the reason why that was a big no-no was because he lost the Senate race back in 2018. And so now that we're back into the fray of all of this conversation for the 2024 Senate race, we're looking at what changed. What happened was that the Republican Party chose correctly. They chose the right person for this race. And what that meant was Montana went from being a state where Jon Tester was up 4 points before the primary, up 9 points before the primary, up 2 points before the primary. And then the moment that Tim Sheehy became the Republican nominee for Senate in Montana, what we found was that the numbers started to change quite dramatically. Jon Tester went from being at 49%, according to a Survey USA poll, which is one of the more respected and accurate ones in the state of Montana, to being reduced down to 44, 45, 46, 45, 43, 45, 44. Tim Sheehy, on the other hand, went from low 40%. I'm not going to count in that Emerson poll because it was before we even hit 2024, but looking at it, right, Tim Sheehy hit a low 40 points. In Survey USA, 9 points down. And then it was 42. Then it was 50, which was strong, but a Republican firm, and I will say that. Then it was 48, 51, 50, 51, 52. The numbers are moving in the right direction for Tim Sheehy and the Republican Party in Montana. And here's what Democrats know. They lose Montana without any type of investments anywhere else. They lose the Senate hands down, right? That is how it works. Democrats lose Montana, and that's it. There is no possible pathway forward because all of the other states, besides Texas and Florida, which were big no-nos for the party in the beginning, you look at them, North Dakota, not competitive. Wyoming, not competitive. Utah, not competitive. Nebraska, Missouri, Indiana, West Virginia, Tennessee, Mississippi, all of these states will be margins of victory for the Republican Party by at least 15 points in this election cycle. And so when we take a look elsewhere, where can Democrats invest in? Well, it comes down to just Texas and Florida. And so these are states, too, that the Democratic Party looked at the most recent midterms and said, why in the world would we invest in a state like Florida, which just voted for Marco Rubio in a Senate race that was very nationalized? The Democrats were hoping they could make inroads into, where Marco Rubio won by 16.4% against Congresswoman Val Demings, who was actually at the height of the Veep stakes back in 2020. I mean, she was someone who had been well known across Florida, had a lot of investments. Democrats raised a lot of money in that race, but they were running in a midterm year where Republicans did phenomenally in the state of Florida. And you can see when it came down to the overall money raised on both sides of the aisle. I mean, to be fair, the polls showed a much larger race than what many people were expecting. By the end of it, Marco Rubio was expected to win by at least 9 points. He won by 16, so that's an outperformance of roughly 6. To be fair, Donald Trump did not outperform the 2016 numbers by 6 points or the 2020 numbers by 6 points. And so this was really an anomaly, but largely because Democrats did not invest in the Senate race, largely because Democrats did not believe they had any chance of winning here. But what happened in terms of the money raised was that Val Demings was still raising money on her own. But it wasn't enough to even combat what the Republican Party already had, the infrastructure they had set up. I don't know why we can't pull it up here. But overall, what we know about this race was that it was pretty substantive in terms of the amount of money spent by the Democratic Party, but it wasn't being spent by national. And there also was no major investments. There wasn't a swooping in of ad buys upon ad buys. The infrastructure wasn't set up. Val Demings was largely on her own, fundraising on her own, running this campaign entirely on her own, versus now the Democratic Party is investing in the state of Texas and in the state of Florida. And there's a reason for this, right? I just told you why Montana now seems more and more out of reach. Keep in mind that number here of Tim Sheehy being up 6.7%. Based on the data points now, both Texas and Florida have actually come to a point where they are closer than the state of Montana. And now, again, it wasn't always like this, right? Texas was always a state that Ted Cruz had maintained large leads in. The first set of polls that we saw during the election cycle of this time around, Cruz plus 16. And so to see that reduced down to Cruz plus 5, and then also Florida too, where we saw Rick Scott up 7 points, 8 points, 17 points. Now with the same firm, Florida Atlantic University, going from what was a 17-point lead now down to 4 points, it is clear that something is going right here for the Democratic Party in the state of Florida. Now, does this mean that they will win Florida or Texas? The answer is probably not. But at the same time, what is happening here is that the race is narrowing, and it's forcing not only Democrats to reconsider pathway forward to win the United States Senate, but it also is forcing Republicans to play defense in the state of Florida. Rick Scott's campaign just announced that they are now spending $10 million in TV ads in the Florida Senate race. The reason why that matters is because Republicans don't really need to invest in Florida, at least based on the 2022 midterm cycle. What they can use that data point to tell us is that Republicans have the upper hand, regardless of what the Democratic Party would like to know about Florida or would like to see out of the battleground state. Florida still is going to vote for the GOP on the presidential level. I've been adamant about that from the very beginning. I do not see Kamala Harris having a pathway forward to winning that state, nor do I think that we are going to see the Democrats win the Senate race here. But the Republican Party still is getting worried. Similar to how Democrats in Maryland were getting worried, but Florida is a far more competitive state. They are now investing $10 million in TV ads in the state of Florida, and it doesn't really just end there too. When you take a look at the election for the 2024 cycle in the state of Texas, Ted Cruz has actually outspent and out-fundraised Colin Allred. And that's again because national Democrats did not invest in this race early enough, because many people didn't see that this race would be the one that could be more close than Montana. It didn't make sense. Jon Tester was the elected incumbent who had won that election multiple times, had been well known across the state of Montana, and to be quite frank, Montana is a much cheaper media market than Texas. Montana has one or two that stretch the entire state. Texas has 27 different media markets, right, roughly. So you're talking about, not 27, but a massive amount of TV and media markets across the state that really do make a difference, and it costs a lot more, right? Montana has a fraction of the population of Texas, rather. Texas has over 10 times the amount of people as the state of Montana. And so money needs to get a lot higher for the Democratic Party and get a lot further in that state. Versus right now, what we're seeing is that Ted Cruz has out-fundraised Colin Allred by $20 million. He's outspent Colin Allred by over $20 million. You are talking about massive amounts of money, and this is only as of June, so that's why I say over $20 million. Republicans are continuing to pour funds and funds and funds, and that's what we're seeing, right, in the Florida Senate race too. Republicans are actually getting quite worried when it comes down to where they are in this state. What we're finding is that Democrats are not investing in the state early enough, but now are realizing that it is going to be the state that might actually make the difference, that Texas might be that state that makes the difference. I do want to ground us in remembering that these states will more than likely vote for the GOP. But it puts the Republican Party on offense. It reduces the amount of money that national PACs, one's controlled by Senator John Thune, one's controlled by Senator Mitch McConnell. These are people who do hold very high-ranking positions within the Republican Party and do get to say a lot about where the money goes in their state, in their super PAC, in their PAC, whatever it might be. But in this case, they're now reallocating funds to Florida and Texas because Democrats are too. And that's where we're also starting to set up future battlegrounds for both sides of the aisle, right? You look at Montana, that is one of the last few states that has had a major party winning it on the presidential level by a massive margin and an opposition party representing it in Congress on a statewide level. You're talking about a U.S. Senate seat or an at-large U.S. House seat. Democrats in Montana used to do a lot better, but polarization hit really, really hard. You can see that over time, Montana went from being a state the Democrats historically had relied on for pretty substantive victories. In the House elections, pretty strong for the GOP. When you're taking a look at the Senate races, though, Democrats previously held on to a number of seats in Montana, not to mention that in the presidential level in 2008, Montana was actually a swing state. Believe it or not, it's a state that Donald Trump won by 16 points. But in 2008, you can see that Barack Obama took it from being a state that George W. Bush won by 21 points and made it a state that John McCain only won by 2.3. And it goes to show, Montana, too, has historically had Democratic governors. Montana has historically been very pro-electing one Democrat sometimes when they have multiple House seats. In some cases, not that. But you're looking at the Senate races. Democrats have done well there. Now is really going to be that reckoning moment where Montana, alongside many other states that used to have opposition party members representing them in Congress. Think about 2018 when we saw all of those seats flip from blue to red, right? Missouri, Claire McCaskill, Democratic incumbent, lost. Indiana, Joe Donnelly, Democratic incumbent, lost. North Dakota, Heidi Heitkamp, Democratic incumbent, lost. Again, in these states, lost, flipped from blue to red. Florida, same thing. Bill Nelson. Not Ben Nelson. Ben Nelson is from Nebraska. So I think this is Bill Nelson. Yes, Bill Nelson. Just had to double check. What you found here, Rick Scott took the state from blue to red. This is what has been happening in a lot of these states. And what happened in West Virginia? Joe Manchin won by 3.2. What happened in Montana? John Tester won by 3.6. Joe Manchin read the leaves, right? Read the tea leaves and said, I'm out. I'm not going to run for re-election because even in this race, Patrick Morrissey barely campaigned. Donald Trump did visit the state. He did try to encourage voters to get out and away from Joe Manchin. It didn't work out. But that race there was hardly contested by the GOP to the extent that they would have invested in 2024 with their incumbent governor on the ballot. So, Joe Manchin said, I'm not running for re-election. Republicans can have that seat. In Montana, right, Matt Rosendale was not a stellar candidate whatsoever. He was not likable. He did not do well in the polls. He did not do well in fundraising. And Montana became a state that Democrats were able to hold on to. But now the time is coming that Montana moves away. But Texas was 2.6% in the last time this seat was up. Florida was 0.12% in the last time this seat was up. And so you can see, although Republicans did win these seats, the track record of them being more competitive does actually stole through, especially looking at the data that we're working with now. Because Florida in the 2020 election only went to Trump by 3.4. Texas only went to Trump by 5.6. Montana, however, again, despite a national shift towards the Democratic Party that really hit almost every single state, especially the battlegrounds, Montana went to Trump by 16.4. And so that's why this has started to become more insurmountable, but again, also speaks to what we will likely see in the future for Democratic investments. But the Democratic Party going on the offensive here is now making Republicans go on the defensive here, which means money less spent on the presidential race or helping some of these down ballot, ballot measures, down ballot House races, down ballot legislative races. The money that is being spent and allocated here, the Republican Party needs far more than the Democratic Party does. The Democratic Party has out-fundraised the Republican Party by over $200 million at this point. So the Democratic Party has money to spend. The DNC announced they were giving every single state party $2.5 million. To put that to scale, that's over $100 million being sent directly to state parties, even states like Idaho, which Democrats lose by 30 points statewide, states like Wyoming, right? Even battleground states like Michigan were getting a slight bump. Safe blue states were getting $2.5 million. Democrats have just been spreading their money and spreading the wealth that they have accumulated through this massive fundraising haul they have seen since Kamala Harris came to the top of the ticket, and it has now given Democrats the ability and the agency to invest in these battleground states when Republicans really are far more cash-strapped. Now, Republicans still hold that fundraising advantage in the state of Texas, but it clearly isn't helping Ted Cruz either. I do want to point out that Ted Cruz's numbers, despite out fundraising and outspending Colin Allred quite significantly, have actually gone down in terms of the amount that we've seen in terms of support, right? You can see that Texas has, in fact, narrowed from what was practically a double-digit, every so often, double-digit lead for Ted Cruz. Since Kamala Harris has gotten to the top of the ticket, the largest lead we have seen is an 8-point victory, which had Ted Cruz up 16 points just earlier on in this election cycle. So 16 down to 8, and beyond that, too, the majority of them, 2 points, 4 points, 3 points, 4 points. You're seeing a tightening race. You're seeing a decrease in support for Ted Cruz, while still the overall numbers moving up altogether. Less undecideds, more people that know Colin Allred, who a year ago had less than 50% name ID. Now that he has 80% name ID, 70%, you're talking about an increased vote share for him, going from 27% back when the University of Texas first did the poll, now to 45%. Now to 45% on the overall most recent two the Texas Hispanic Policy Foundation and the Hill and Emerson College. Massive, massive gains for Representative Colin Allred. And so again, I think we're going to find that Texas and Florida are going to be a bit more competitive now. The Democrats are actually spending money in this race. To also put things into perspective, too, Democrats always invest in Florida and only recently have started to shy away after Ron DeSantis and Marco Rubio had phenomenal victories back in 2022. But beyond that point, Texas is a state that Democrats have not invested in since 2002. That was the last time Democrats invested in any statewide race in the state of Texas, and at that point, they ended up losing the seat. And so Texas is a state where Democrats, again, have not tapped into. They haven't decided to invest in really anyway. In 2018, they didn't even invest in that state, and guess what happened? Beto O'Rourke lost by 2.6%. This was a very close Senate race, and Democrats didn't even invest in the race. And when you take a look at the amount of money that was raised, if we can go ahead and find it, I don't know why Wikipedia used to put it here all the time, Beto O'Rourke had to do that all on his own. And so he was able to outspend Ted Cruz. To be fair, and to that point, as I'm saying now, that Democrats are seeing Republicans return that investment in states like Florida. Republicans did not invest in Texas in 2018. They thought Ted Cruz would be fine. He was deciding to use some of that money left over from the presidential bid and started to use that name ID to fundraise and combat Beto O'Rourke. But back to that point, too, Republicans were looking at Texas and saying, there's no reason to worry. Ted Cruz will be fine. Texas is ruby red, until it wasn't. And now it's barely red. It's looking a little bit more pink than anything else. And so Republicans now have started to pick up on this, which is why I think this is going to be a future battleground, a state that Democrats and Republicans are both going to be investing in quite tremendously. And I do believe the same about Florida, especially when candidates like Rick Scott are on the ballot. When it's people like Donald Trump and people like Ron DeSantis, that actually does do really well with voters in the state of Florida. But for some reason, they are not in love with Rick Scott the same way. His approval rating is not as high as DeSantis or Donald Trump, right? The overall favorability is on him too, just not even in terms of how is he doing a job as senator, but also how do you like the guy? Rick Scott holds a lower level of approval all around. We're finding the Democrats are starting to build this perfect storm of a possibility of a victory in Florida and Texas. And while I don't think it's the likeliest outcome, the fact remains Democrats are now investing in these states for the first time in a very long time and doing so in a meaningful way that could make an impact and change the outcome of this year's Senate elections. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the top left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2024 presidential election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.